Beneath the roar of bombers and the thunder of war, something else was whispering across the Pacific. Not orders, not static, but voices, disconnected, desperate, and impossible. As the Battle of Midway raged, the USS Hornet began to receive transmissions from a submarine declared lost. And with each message, a deeper secret surfaced, one the Navy would rather stay buried. Autumn 1942. The streets of Lyon lay under a hushed fog, the type that clung to stone like secrets. Occupied France wore its silence like a funeral shroud, and in its shadows, resistance simmered. Anna Weiss stepped out of the worn stone doorway of her mother's flower shop, scarf pulled tight around her neck. To the passing German patrols, she was just another French girl delivering arrangements to hotels and cafes. But inside her wicker basket, beneath peonies and camellias, lay slivers of war, Enigma code fragments smuggled from the south, wrapped in silk and sewn into the seams of funeral ribbons. Anna had been recruited 6 months earlier by the Special Operations Executive. A cryptographer by training, fluent in German, French, and Latin, she'd been working as a translator for the Free French in London. Her father, a Jewish mathematician from Leipzig, had died in Dachau the year before, arrested for aiding German communists. That grief had made her calm, focused. She never flinched when briefed by the man with the monocle and cigarette holder. Major Carver, Suez liaison to the Maquis. "Your silence is your armor," he had said. "Your mind is your weapon. You'll never carry a gun." Every week, Anna received coded phrases from London, broadcast over BBC French services under banal disguises. "The apple orchard is blooming," meant that new Enigma intercepts had arrived via submarine in Marseille. "The pianist is asleep," meant Gestapo activity had increased in the Rhone Valley. On foggy mornings like this, she would retrieve the silk fragments, encrypted in 4-character groups, and ferry them by bicycle to the foothills north of Lyon, where a forest chapel, long abandoned, had become a drop point for SOE operatives. The chapel had no bell, only a broken clock face permanently stuck at 3:13. There, under the altar, she would bury the messages in wax paper envelopes inside a carved-out hymnal titled Revelations. Another courier would retrieve them at midnight and carry them through Spain, eventually to London. The information was critical. Troop movements, railway schedules, panzer fuel shortages, and even Luftwaffe flight plans, all from collaborators and embedded agents across occupied Europe. She operated with methodical grace, trusted by her contacts, even respected by some who didn't know her name. They called her La Dame de Brume, the Lady of Fog. But in late November, something shifted. First came the rumors, a Maquis cell ambushed in the Pyrenees, their radio operator burned alive. Then a coded message arrived from London, "The wolf is in the orchard." That meant a double agent had infiltrated the route. Anna's hands trembled for the first time as she decoded the message that accompanied it. Trust in 01. The signature code, used by Carver himself, was missing. That alone chilled her. 2 nights later, she was late returning from a drop. As she neared the edge of the Presqu'île, tires crunching against the cobblestone, she noticed the flicker of a cigarette. A man leaned against the wall beside the stone fountain near Rue de Brest, coat too clean for a Frenchman. German issue boots. He nodded once. She kept cycling. By morning, she had moved into the catacombs beneath Croix-Rousse, an old resistance safehouse used briefly during the failed Gaullist uprisings in 1941. There, surrounded by damp bones and oil lanterns, she hid for 3 days. When she emerged, she found that the flower shop had been burned. Her mother was gone. A neighbor, trembling, said the Gestapo had come asking for a half-Jewish courier with an English accent. Anna knew she was now alone. What followed was a frantic month. She altered routes, changed drop points, destroyed old codes. But each week, she still delivered. The Enigma fragments had become vital as Allied planners began preparations for what would become Operation Dragoon. Her work enabled aerial targeting of Nazi supply lines, weakening southern defenses before the 1944 invasions. But her isolation grew. One by one, her old contacts vanished. Some fled to Spain. Others were arrested. A few simply disappeared. In January 1943, while delivering a package to the village of Sathene, she met a new courier, Julien Desmarais. Younger than most, barely 20, with sharp blue eyes and a stammer when nervous. He claimed to be with the Gaullist Free French. Carver had mentioned him once before, but she had never worked with him directly. He seemed earnest, but something gnawed at her instincts. Why had he not used a verification phrase? Why did his boots shine like they'd never stepped off parade ground? She decided to test him. The next week, she encoded a false fragment, information about a fictitious German munitions train traveling near Avignon. Within 48 hours, British intelligence reported an ambush had occurred there, only it wasn't Germans who were attacked. It was a Maquis sabotage unit. 5 were killed. 1 was captured alive. Anna ran. Her final message to London was broadcast via coded Morse on a stolen transmitter. Courier compromised. Silk Road burned. Terminating line. Her last known drop was made on February 18, 1943, at the St. Rambert Cemetery. Inside a rusted lantern on a forgotten grave, she left one final silk fragment, encrypted with the phrase, "Un and sans ailes," an angel without wings. The next day, she vanished. For decades, her fate remained unknown. But in 1981, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, a Soviet file was declassified in Warsaw. Inside was a dossier detailing a French-born operative captured near Dijon in 1943, interrogated for weeks by the Gestapo, then transferred to Mauthausen under the alias Annette Valiant. One witness, a Polish political prisoner, recalled a pale woman with a German accent who wrote strange symbols into the dirt with her finger every night before sleeping. She died in January 1945, weeks before liberation. Only in 2003 did her full story come to light, when MI6 released wartime SOE records to the public. A memorial plaque was added in Lyon beneath the ruins of the flower shop. It reads, Asterisk, to Anna Weiss, La Dame de Brume. She carried messages through fog and fear, and gave her silence for our freedom. Asterisk. And inside the British National Archives, there remains a single silk scarf, sealed behind glass, its faded symbols preserved, a fragment of war, of love, and of a courier who walked alone. The Russian earth groaned in July 1943. The air was a furnace of dust, cordite, and anticipation. Kursk, its fields burned and pockmarked by months of attrition, braced for a storm unlike any in military history. 2 titans prepared for war, the Wehrmacht's elite panzer divisions, bolstered by the newest Tiger tanks, and the Red Army's freshly dug-in armor battalions. Amid the crescendo of the impending clash stood 2 men who would never meet face to face, yet were destined to be bound together by fire and steel. Captain Arkady Borodin was 32, the son of a violin maker from Stalingrad. Soft-spoken, analytical, and fiercely loyal to the motherland, Arkady had survived the siege of his city by threading his battered T-34 through the wreckage like a predator. He named his tank Katya, after his wife, who had died in the winter bombings. Now, promoted to command a small armored company within the 5th Guards Tank Army, Arkady's new battlefield was the flat expanse near Prokhorovka, a death trap for the unwary, where every thicket might hide a panzer. His enemy was Major Dieter Falk, 38, a former cavalry officer turned tank commander. Dieter had joined the Nazi Party early, out of ambition rather than ideology. He was known for his precision, his icy demeanor, and a terrifying kill record. His tiger eye, named Brunhild, bore 76 small swastika stencils under the barrel, each representing a destroyed enemy vehicle. Dieter's orders were clear: spearhead the northern pincer of Operation Citadel, pierce the Soviet lines, and envelop Kursk before reinforcements arrived. The battle began on July 5 with a thunderous artillery barrage. Soviet defenses had been laid thick with mines, trenches, and anti-tank guns. Arkady and his company moved at dawn, crawling forward under smoke cover, engines humming like low orchestras tuning before a concert of death. In his journal, later recovered from a melted tin case, Arkady wrote, Asterisk, there is a music to war. The whine of shells, the clatter of tracks, the coughing roar of diesel. Each tank sings its own note, until the crescendo. Asterisk. The crescendo came on July 12. Prokhorovka. At sunrise, Over 300 Soviet tanks launched a desperate counterattack against the advancing 2 SS Panzer Corps. Arkady led the charge through an apple orchard, firing blind as smoke and dust choked the fields. His T-34 was lighter, faster than the Tigers, and he knew their weakness, the thin rear armor. He drilled his men to maneuver in pairs, flanking and striking hard before retreating into cover. But Dieter Falk anticipated it. He positioned Brunhild atop a low ridge, commanding a view of the battlefield like a conductor over an orchestra pit. One by one, Soviet tanks came into view. Falk didn't panic. He didn't shout. He whispered firing orders like prayers. Turret, 9 o'clock. Range, 400. Fire. Another kill. Another plume of smoke. His radio crackled with chatter from panicked subordinates, but Dieter remained detached. To him, this was a duel, not of nations, but of minds. Arkady saw his comrades burning. 2 of his tanks were disabled within the first minutes. He pivoted Katya behind a smoldering barn, cut the engine, and listened. Tank crews are taught to recognize enemy movement by ear. The Tiger's Maybach engine had a lower growl, like a lion waking. He heard it. He crept forward through the wreckage, spotting the glint of Brunhild on the ridge. No other tank would expose itself so boldly. Arkady knew that was his adversary. He ordered his gunner to prepare high-velocity shells and plotted a looping attack, using the terrain to shield his approach. For 37 minutes, Arkady and Dieter circled each other through smoke and broken steel, exchanging volleys that missed by meters. One of Arkady's shells pinged off the Tiger's angled front plate. Falk retaliated with a direct hit to a Soviet T-34, sending it skyward in a fireball. Then came the moment. Arkady spotted a gap in the tree line to the Tiger's right flank. He gunned the engine, using a wrecked Panther tank as cover. His loader screamed over the engine noise, "Loaded!" Brunhild turned. Both guns fired. Arkady's shell struck first, tearing into the Tiger's right track and rendering it immobile. Falk's round sheared the side armor of Katya, killing Arkady's radio operator instantly. Flames erupted in the cabin. Arkady, dazed but alive, scrambled out through the top hatch. He looked across the field. Smoke poured from Brunhild, but Falk had survived. He climbed out, injured, coat torn, and stared across the 100 meters of scorched earth between them. For a moment, they locked eyes. Neither raised a weapon. Arkady stumbled backward into a trench, dragged to safety by passing infantry. Falk, coughing blood, was pulled into a German half-track. The duel was over, but neither man would fight again. Falk lost his right hand to burns and spent the rest of the war in a field hospital, discharged in early 1944. After the war, he disappeared into West Germany, where he lived quietly under a false name, repairing farm equipment. Arkady was promoted, awarded the Order of the Red Banner, but never returned to frontline duty. He suffered chronic lung damage from the fire and became an instructor in Kazan, teaching young tank cadets the lessons of Kursk. In 1968, a Soviet journalist visited Germany for a veterans exhibition in Munich. There, displayed among wartime memorabilia, was a model Tiger tank. Inside the turret, a note written in fading pencil read, **, Brunhild, July 12th, Kursk. The Russian tank danced faster. **. The journalist recognized the name. He contacted Arkady, who by then was a retired colonel. When shown the note, he simply nodded. "I knew he was watching," he said. "We played our music. Mine ended first. But I finished the song." Today, in the Museum of the Great Patriotic War in Moscow, sits a restored T-34 marked Katya, beside a photograph of a smiling young captain with soot on his face. Opposite, in the Tank Museum of Munster, a scale model of Brunhild remains on display. 2 ghosts in iron, bound forever in a symphony of thunder. The island of Okinawa, April 1945. The skies roared with the drone of American bombers. The sea to the west was black with the silhouettes of warships. It was the final approach to Japan's mainland, and the island had become a fortress and a grave. But beneath the surface, in ancient caves carved by wind and war, a group of 12 young women moved like shadows, bandaging wounds, whispering prayers, and writing letters they would never send. They were called Hana no Shirmai, the Sisters of the Flowers. Officially, they were student nurses recruited from Naha's Daiichi Women's High School. But their unofficial name, whispered among surviving civilians, was Paper Flowers, a term of fragility and beauty, of lives too delicate for the hell that had come upon them. The story begins with the diary of Haruko Mizushima, aged 17 when the Americans landed. Her entries, recovered decades later from a rusted bento box hidden in a collapsed tomb, would become the only known first-hand account of the unit's final days. "We were told we would bring honor," Haruko wrote on April 2, 1945, just 2 days after the first landings. "But they gave us no medicine. Only bandages. No morphine. Only razors. We are not nurses. We are watchers of death." The girls, led by a 31-year-old Red Cross instructor named Akiko Tanabe, had been ordered into the south caves of Maeda, a limestone ridge honeycombed with natural tunnels. There, in makeshift field hospitals, they treated the wounded of the 32nd Army, shattered soldiers, blinded conscripts, children scorched by napalm. "We are angels," Akiko told them the first night. "But not of heaven. We carry hope in our hands, even if it's soaked in blood." Hope was in short supply. Food ran out by the second week. They boiled moss for soup. Haruko wrote of wrapping wounds in strips torn from school uniforms. One girl, Emi, whispered poetry to the dying. Another, Ayano, once dreamt of becoming a ballet dancer. Now she amputated a soldier's leg with a rusty farm tool. Outside, the Americans advanced relentlessly. Kamikaze attacks lit the ocean with fire. Okinawa's villages were flattened under naval barrages. Leaflets dropped from planes urged surrender. But the imperial edict was clear: never be captured. Civilians were warned that American soldiers would rape and torture them. Propaganda films had shown mothers leaping off cliffs with their children. Then, in mid-May, came a new order. Captain Genji Obata of the Imperial Army delivered it in person, stepping into the cave's flickering candlelight with a ceremonial sword and trembling hands. "You are to prepare for self-sacrifice," he said. "The enemy is closing in. The caves must not fall." The implication was clear. Cyanide pills were handed out. Akiko refused. She hid hers in a crack in the rock wall. That night, she spoke to the girls. "We are not weapons," she said. "We are not fuel for their fire. If you want to die, it will not be by their command." A plan began to form. On May 21, with shellfire pounding the upper ridges, Akiko and Haruko ventured out under cover of smoke. They carried a white sheet sewn from torn petticoats. Akiko had stitched a red cross into its center with blood and thread. Their goal: to make contact with American troops rumored to be nearby and negotiate safe passage for the other girls and the wounded. They never returned. Haruko's diary ends on May 21 with a line in uneven ink. "We saw the sea again. I never thought blue could be so cruel." But that wasn't the end. In 1972, during the Okinawa reversion ceremonies when the island was officially returned to Japanese governance, a strange letter arrived at the office of a local historian, written in broken English, signed only Eleanor B. It read, "I treated a girl in 1945, South Caves. She said her name was Hako or Haku. She had burns. She said she was a nurse. She cried in English. Said, 'Sister's still there.' We took her to ship. I don't know what happened after. I always wondered." A search was launched, but no official records existed. No names matched. Then, in 1994, during construction near Maeda Escarpment, workers unearthed a sealed chamber. Inside were bones, 12 sets, along with rusted surgical tools, a Red Cross armband, and the remains of an unfinished paper flower, crafted from schoolwork and bandage wrappers. DNA testing confirmed the bones were all female, aged 16 to 32. Haruko, Akiko, Ayano, and the others, still together, still hidden in the dark. Their story became the subject of a 2005 documentary titled Paper Flowers: The Lost Nurses of Okinawa. Survivors of the 32nd Army interviewed in the film claimed that Akiko had attempted to evacuate the girls through an abandoned drainage tunnel but had been blocked by a cave-in. They survived for nearly 2 weeks longer, living off rainwater and roots, refusing suicide, still treating the wounded. In 2015, during a rare public address, an elderly Japanese-American nurse named Eleanor Benson confirmed she had treated a burn victim aboard a hospital ship offshore Okinawa. She had one eye swollen shut, she recalled. She kept saying, "Maeda Cave, sisters, no bombs, please." "I didn't understand it then. I do now." No government, Japanese or American, ever officially acknowledged the operation. But on Okinawa, in a shaded grove near Maeda Hill, stands a small granite plaque, placed quietly by local schoolchildren. It reads, "Asterisk for the girls who made flowers from paper and peace from pain. You did not vanish. You bloomed where no one saw. Asterisk. The cave remains sealed. The wind whispers through the grass above. And if you listen, some say you can still hear a lullaby echoing from the rocks, sung in trembling voices by nurses who chose mercy over madness." Berlin, 1944. The city still dressed itself in illusions. Posters of victory clung to crumbling walls. Ribbons flapped in dusty windows. The newsreels spoke of glorious triumphs in the East, of new weapons, of Hitler's resolve. But beneath the cracked marble and shattered glass, Berlin had become a ghost waltzing to a dying tune. 3 lives circled each other in that final year, each unknown to the others, each dancing toward ruin, redemption, or silence. The first was Elizabeth Kramer, 41, an artist once celebrated for her vivid murals in Reich buildings. She had painted banners for the 1936 Olympics, illustrated children's books on Aryan virtues. But after her son was drafted and lost near Leningrad, something broke. Her new works turned darker, strange. Silhouettes of men with melting faces. A swastika drowning in red ink. One day in March, the Gestapo came. Not to arrest her, but to commission a mural for the Ministry of Propaganda's underground bunker. Elizabeth accepted. But she hid something behind every stroke. Subtle symbols, messages in Morse along the hem of a soldier's coat, a crying child whose shadow spelled out the Hebrew letter, Chai, life. Her diary, found after the war inside a rolled canvas, detailed her descent into silent rebellion. "Art is a lie," she wrote, "but I will paint the truth into its bones." The second was Jacob Rothstein, 29, a pianist once scheduled to debut at the Berlin Philharmonie in 1938. But Jacob was a Jew. When the Nuremberg laws descended, his life vanished. His father died in Sachsenhausen. His mother disappeared in the Warsaw transports. Jacob escaped during a raid and went underground. By 1944, he was living in a tomb. Literally. Beneath the old Jewish cemetery on Skonhauser Allee, Jacob had carved out a hidden room inside a mausoleum, sharing it with 2 orphans and an elderly widow named Frau Klein who fed them stale bread and whispers of hope. Every few days, when air raids howled and the streets emptied, Jacob would climb through the broken sewer line to reach an abandoned café on Linienstrasse. There, by candlelight, he played the piano. Not for anyone. Not for survival. But because it was all he had left. He wrote music in the dark. Minor keys that mimicked the sound of distant bombs, sonatas that wept for names carved into train manifests. The third was Lucas Hartmann, 17, a member of the Edelweiss Pirates, the youth resistance scattered across Nazi cities. While the Hitlerjugend marched and saluted, Lucas stole ration books, spray-painted slogans, passed messages to foreign workers. He grew up fatherless, raised by a mother who cleaned toilets in the Reich Chancellery. She begged him to keep his head down. Instead, he picked up a brush. By summer, his tag appeared across half the city, a white flower bleeding red from its stem. He called it Die Gebrochene Hoffnung, the broken hope. The Gestapo called it treasonous vandalism. Rewards were posted. Lucas didn't care. One night in July, he was caught climbing out of a storm drain beneath Alexanderplatz. A soldier aimed his rifle, but paused. Elizabeth. She had seen his symbol that morning, sprayed across the concrete wall of the ministry. She recognized the face, pale, bruised, too young. She stepped between him and the soldier. "He's my nephew," she said. "He's an idiot boy. He was painting pigeons." The soldier, tired, spat and left. That night, Lucas stayed in her studio, watching her mix paint, silent. She didn't ask his name. He didn't ask hers. She gave him a brush. He painted a child on her mural, hiding behind a curtain, eyes wide. She added it, wordlessly. Meanwhile, underground, Jacob wrote his final piece. He called it Berliner Walzer für niemand, Berlin Waltz for no one. It was a 6-minute piece, lilting and eerie, a waltz that danced through sorrow and silence. One night in November, Jacob carried the sheet music to the surface, wrapped in oilskin, and left it in the ruins of the synagogue where he had first played at age 9. It was found months later, blood-stained, beside the body of a soldier who had tried to warm himself with it. As 1945 clawed its way into the city, the world above burned. Soviet artillery thundered from the east. Refugees clawed for shelter. Hitler's speeches grew more manic. In the final weeks of April, Elizabeth finished her mural. She added one last detail, an open window in the corner, and behind it, a single white flower growing in snow. Then she vanished. Some say she fled. Others say she poisoned herself in the ministry washroom. No record remains. Only her signature, hidden in ultraviolet paint beneath the soldier's boot. Jacob died before the war's end. When Soviet troops discovered his mausoleum hideout, they found the remains of 3 people, frozen together in a final embrace. Jacob's hands were still clutching a folded piece of sheet music. Lucas lived. He was captured by the Soviets, mistaken for SS. When they found his painted symbol carved into his bunk, they prepared to shoot him. But an officer recognized it. He had seen it sprayed on walls during the final assault, beside warnings like, "Children below," and "Do not bomb." The officer let him go. In 1951, Lucas testified at the trial of a former Gestapo officer, detailing the use of child informants and torture cells beneath the city zoo. Afterward, he vanished from public life. In 1987, a music professor at Humboldt University stumbled upon a manuscript during renovations, Berliner Walzer für niemand star. The handwriting was faded, the notes scratched. It was performed only once, in a private recital. Elizabeth's mural was rediscovered in 2004 behind plaster in a sealed room under what had been Goebbels' ministry. Conservators debated whether to restore it. In the end, they left it untouched, allowing the faded child behind the curtain to peer out forever. And on a small plaque beside the mural, someone, unknown, placed a ceramic tile, glazed in white and red. A broken flower. Berlin still waltzes. Not in ballrooms, but in quiet cellars, in echoes down tunnels, in music heard only by those who know how to listen. To the ones who danced in silence. June 1942. The Battle of Midway raged across the Pacific like a storm without horizon. The U.S. Navy, reeling from the devastation at Pearl Harbor, was mounting its most daring counterstrike yet, an ambush of the Imperial Japanese fleet. Among the carriers at the heart of the American task force, the USS Hornet steamed forward, her decks alive with the thunder of launching aircraft. But beneath the roar of war, a mystery whispered through her radios, strange transmissions, unaccounted for, impossible, and haunting. The first message came on June 4th, at 0607 hours. Hull breach. Forward torp bay, oxygen low, Razor 2 responding, static. Lieutenant Charles Avery, a radio operator aboard the Hornet, looked up from his headset. He checked the frequency again, an emergency naval channel used only by submerged vessels. Repeat, this is Razor 2. Request surface evac, coordinates, then silence. There was no Razor 2 on record. Avery filed a report, but with the battle raging, it was dismissed as static, interference, perhaps a garbled signal from one of the many burning aircraft plunging into the sea. But the next night, it returned. Oxygen red, daylight above. Heard singing. Is anyone there? This time, Avery alerted his superior, Commander Harold Loomis, who listened to the playback. Both men grew cold. The voice had changed. Slower, strained, distant, like it came through water. Loomis checked the ship's logs. 2 weeks earlier, the USS Scorpion, a Gato-class submarine assigned to surveillance near Wake Island, had been declared missing, presumed lost with all hands. Its last known call sign? Razor 2. An investigation was quietly launched. Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance was briefed. The possibility was floated that the Scorpion had somehow survived, stranded beneath the sea, sending up desperate flares through shortwave. But the transmissions were inconsistent, never at the same hour, never on the same frequency. On June 6th, just after midnight, a third signal broke through. He said it wasn't a torpedo, it was ours. Tell Francis I didn't mean to. Avery recognized the voice. He had heard it before, months earlier at Pearl, during a supply transfer. It belonged to Seaman Henry Sloan, sonar tech aboard the Scorpion. Sloan was reported dead. Word spread among the radio crew. Men began referring to the signals as ghost calls. Some refused night shifts. Others claimed to hear faint singing beneath the static, an old sailor's tune, Shenandoah, drifting between code bursts. Then came the coordinates. On June 7th, the voice spoke again, cracked and shivering. Grid K-13, down here, why don't they come? The grid square corresponded to a deep trench northwest of Midway Atoll, an area passed over by destroyers during early search operations but never thoroughly scanned. Loomis begged for a sonar sweep. Spruance denied it. The battle had moved on. Resources were scarce. The Scorpion was gone, declared sunk. War does not pause for ghosts, he said. But Avery couldn't let it go. He began transcribing the transmissions in a personal notebook. Each time the signal returned, he marked the frequency, time, and words. Over 10 days, a pattern emerged. The messages, when arranged by order and letter spacing, spelled a sentence. Not an accident. Avery feared sabotage, or worse, a friendly fire incident. He compiled his notes into a formal complaint. The document vanished within days. He was reassigned to a minesweeper in the Aleutians. The Hornet would sink 4 months later during the Battle of Santa Cruz. The story might have died there. But in 1989, a civilian expedition funded by an Oceanic Institute out of Tokyo discovered the wreck of the Scorpion, lying upright at the bottom of the Pacific Trench near Midway. Its hull was mostly intact. No sign of torpedo damage. But the forward torpedo bay showed evidence of internal detonation from within. Salvage divers retrieved the ship's logbook, miraculously preserved in a watertight container. The final entry, scrawled in pencil, read, "Sighting friendly. Requesting identification. Fired warning shot. They returned fire. Hull breach. Diving. God help us." A Navy records check showed only one friendly submarine in the area that week, the USS Barracuda. Its logs had been redacted. More chilling was what was found in the comms station. A portable transmitter, rigged with an improvised battery array. It could have remained active for days, even weeks after the Scorpion went dark. Sending signals. Calling for help. Calling through the water. Through the war. Through history. In 1992, Charles Avery, aged 74, was interviewed for a public television special on submarine warfare. When asked about the Scorpion, he stared into the camera for a long moment before saying, "They tried. They really did. But war is a hungry thing. Sometimes it eats its own." The producer turned off the camera. Avery leaned forward and whispered something that was never aired. "She wasn't sunk by the Japanese. We did it. By mistake. Then we buried it." To this day, no official Navy acknowledgement of friendly fire on the Scorpion exists. But in the Pacific Fleet Communications Archive, buried among thousands of frequency records, one line stands out. A signal received by an unmanned buoy near Midway in 1973, on an obsolete naval band. Only 3 words. Still down here. The transmitter had been disabled for over 25 years. Today, at the Midway Atoll National Memorial, among the plaques honoring the fallen submariners, there's a small, brass plate added unofficially by a veterans group. It reads, "Asterisk they called. We listened too late. Asterisk." And some say, on quiet nights, the static returns, faint Morse, a forgotten voice, a plea echoing through the deep. A ghost not of man, but of war itself. The war ended. The oceans quieted. But the signal never truly stopped. Somewhere in the dark, beneath miles of crushing silence, a voice still calls out, unfinished, unanswered, and unforgiven. What happened to the USS Scorpion wasn't just a tragedy. It was a cover-up. And if you listen closely, you might still hear the truth leaking through the static.